So we're coming back to the model, to the money model with one sector, no banking. But remember, there were all the guys, you have all your individual Brownian shocks all the time. And you were holding the government bond or money because you want to insure each other against idiosyncratic risk. You cannot write contracts directly with each other, but you can hold the government bond or money. And then after the shock realized, positive or negative, you can make trades with each other. And this allows you, from an ex-ante perspective, to insure each other. Okay, you know I will trade in the future this way or that way. And that's why you like to hold it. And that's why you value this money for the service flow the money gives you. And the more idiosyncratic risk there is, the more you value the service flow. And if, like what we had saw previously, if you have an intermediary sector sucking out idiosyncratic risk because it takes idiosyncratic risk away through these outside equities, risky claims, then actually you value then the money claim less. Okay, and if the intermediary sector is undercapitalized, has to push idiosyncratic risk back to the households, then they value the safe asset more. Okay, but now we go back to a setting where idiosyncratic risk is constant over time, and there's only one sector, and there's no banking sector sucking out idiosyncratic risk or sucking it back in. Now that's what we had before the break. Now what I want to say is I would like to not only have these financial frictions, the intertemporal financial frictions, but also intratemporal monetary frictions in form of medium exchange role of money. So that's what we do. We add now monetary frictions. So the way we do it is to say, okay, the output is AK as before. Of course, some of the output you reinvest to the apples you produce, you plant them in the ground to get more trees in the next period. And then you have to pay some transaction cost. That's a script T or this Gothic T. And this transaction cost depends on the velocity you have on this money. Okay, and it's also everything is proportional to K as well. And so this velocity denotes the output velocity of the ICE money holding, and that's one way you can see it. So it's AK. So you need it for production purposes. Think of a supply chain where you have to have some money holdings in nominal terms divided by the nominal money holding of this individual guy. And if I reinterpret this in terms of the portfolio share of money, in the terms of thetas, it turns out to be just, you can rewrite it this way. So here you can see more money times velocity is equal to the price. And this is, think of your contribution to GDP. It's like a quantity equation shining through. Okay, but in our notation, in terms of theta notation, it looks like this. Okay. Now, so this transaction costs as a function of velocity, one way to specify it would be to specify the transaction costs this way with this particular velocity, where there's a benchmark velocity v nu upper bar. So this is a nu for velocity. And if the velocity goes up, because transaction costs go up, and so we plot it here, and this z, this Gothic z, or z, essentially, if you scale it up, so here is for z equals 50, this function, transaction costs function looks like this. If it's 100, it's the red one. If it's 1,000, it looks like the black one. And if it goes to infinity, it goes to the cash and advance constraint. Okay, you probably have heard this cash and advance constraint. So the velocity has to be below a certain benchmark, this new bar. And then you have, the activities here times in nominal terms, because of the price level, has to be smaller than the velocity and the money holding. So if you want to scale up your activities, the output, you have to hold more money. Okay. So this is just if this Gothic Z goes to infinity, it becomes this cash and advance constraint thing. But this is more general in a sense. Okay, and that's how we model this. Now, one more thing I have to say, we say, oh, this is the specification. Of course, we do this minus the nu in equilibrium. So it's essentially, if you just follow the equilibrium strategy, it doesn't cause any cost to you. Okay, so we essentially reimburse it. If you behave like everybody else in equilibrium, if you were to deviate from it, you have to pay the transaction cost, some extra thing. But if you just, it's only beyond what you do in equilibrium. Okay, what everybody else does in equilibrium. So this is just saying that it has no aggregate implication on total output. Okay, you don't need that. But then you have to carry around the transaction costs, reduce aggregate GDP because of some tax. But then we don't want to deal with that and switch this off. So that's a trick to switch off the aggregate implications on aggregate output. Okay? Quiet now. Questions? That's how we model this. Transaction cost is a generalized way of dealing with this medium of exchange role of money. So now what's new is in red. So we have now this transaction cost floating around. At the margin, they matter, but then we get reimbursed. And of course, we have this idiosyncratic risk. That's what we had this intertemporal financial frictions, where we have this idiosyncratic risk floating around. Again, we have here sigma tilde is a constant. There's no time-varying idiosyncratic risk. This is the same as we had before. Everything is the same. So we do this. And this equation, this slide is totally the same. This before we do any portfolio choice. So it's the same to solve it. Now we have to do the portfolio choice, and I will just rush over it. Essentially here what I do is, rather than using what Yuli used yesterday, the martingale approach, I use an Hamiltonian approach, a stochastic maximum principle approach. So you have to then also now maximize, not only with respect to the portfolio, but you also have to maximize the velocity. And if you take higher velocity, you have to make more transaction cost at the margin. Okay? So we have to choose the thetas and the nus, or one nu.
In this type of models, is there a difference how you create this demand for the money other than transaction costs? Like suppose you have a liquidity, something.
Yes, there are different ways to do that. We find this transaction cost is a very simple way of doing it. Of course, a cash advance would be even more simple, but you don't get any impact on the margins. Later, I will actually go to the cash advance just to solve it in closed form.
This is almost similar to like the shopping time kind of.
Yes, so there are the shopping time models. There's some liquidity approaches. So that all of these these are different approaches to do that. Another homework for you. You can do the whole thing, just put a shopping time model on top of it, but it would lead to similar things. So the only thing is what we're doing here, it's for producing, you need this cash in advance, or you need this transaction cost. It's not for consuming. If you do this consuming cash advance, typically it introduces one term we don't like and we don't think is economically relevant. That's why we do this on the producing side. But there are many different ways you can do that. There's a little literature on that. And the details don't really matter for what I want to focus on. Yes. And I want to do it in a way that this nice manipulation equation still stays nice, and it just adds another term. No? That's the plan. So, but essentially that's your Hamiltonian. You have this log utility, and as you see, that's the SDF. From consumption, then you have the net worth evolution here, the drift of the net worth evolution here, and then you have the price of risk and as the second Lagrangian here. So you maximize this. So you maximize with respect to theta and nu. Okay, there now there's two things, and then you get this two first-order conditions, and so that's with respect to theta, and that's with respect to nu, the first-order conditions, and you have this Lagrange multipliers floating around here. Now, I don't want to go into details of this. You can do this on your own. So you have these two things. You take the difference, what we did all the time. You plug in the first-order conditions. Then you get this expression. But essentially, the same manipulation equation we had before. Remember, when you want to have the drift of the money fraction of wealth, which is money wealth, has to be, compensating you for the impatience you have, for the dilution of the money holding, and you don't need to be compensated because you get some service flow from this financial frictions. And now what we have an additional term, the red one, is delta I. Okay, and what is the delta I? And it came up earlier. I don't know who said it. That's the interest rate difference between money and a shadow bond, in a sense. Okay, what's this extra value you get from money as overcoming the medium of exchange role or lowering the transaction cost if you hold more money, you have to pay less on transaction cost. So that's this delta I. So here what it is essentially, this delta I is the interest rate minus the interest rate on money, which relaxes this transaction cost or the cash advance constraint or the in the zeta, if z goes to infinity. So this delta I reflects this, that the shadow, that's the Lagrange multiplier times this nu. Okay. So what's nice here is you can see on this equation, you can see where does the value of money come from all the different elements in here. Yes?
Is lambda the multiplier on the valuation, on the net worth evolution?
Yes. Hold on, what did so denote the Lagrange multiplier. So this Lagrange multiplier by this, so we have this guy here, that's the way I write it in my Lagrange multiplier. Okay, and that's where the lambda then shows up. Yes. Okay, so this was, I do the first order condition with respect to theta, the portfolio choice. I still have to do, I haven't done with respect to the velocity, so I have to do the velocity one too. And then I can solve this explicitly when I take the first order, so I have this, take the first order condition and solve it explicitly, I get then this lambda explicitly, okay? And that's why we have chosen this particular transaction cost thing, because it makes it, the delta I, a very nice formula, no? It's essentially, you see this elasticity zeta, that's the velocity, if you choose relative to the velocity, it is nu bar, okay? That becomes this nice formula here. And then solving for nu, plugging into definition of nu and aggregating yields, then you get essentially the quantity equation, the GDP times the price level, so the nominal value is the money supply and bond supply together, because here we have only essentially money and bond supply together, and this gives you the equilibrium velocity. And of course, the equilibrium velocity depends on the delta I. So if there's a bigger delta I, you know, how often do you want to run to the bank or to how much money do you want to hold depends on this delta I, the interest rate between the money and some shadow bonds. So I don't have any, I haven't split up, in a minute I will split up the bond and the government bond, the bond and money. And money has this transaction cost feature, medium of exchange feature, while the bond doesn't. Okay, think of a bond which is in zero net supply, or there's no supply yet, as the interest rate, and that's the difference in interest rate. Okay, and so the velocity is a function of this interest rate differential. Okay, and if I have a cash advance, if this z goes to infinity, I have only two possible cases. Either the cash advance constraint is not binding, then this difference in interest rate is zero. Then if the cash advance constraint is not binding, you know, because the velocity is below this benchmark nu bar, then you know, money, I hold it also as a store of value. It cannot have a lower interest rate. It has to have the same interest rate as the bond. Okay. If it's binding, so if I'm at the constraint, then there's a possible, there's the interest rate differential is there. Okay. So why do I do this cash advance limit? Because later, in order to solve everything in closed form, the cash advance constraint setting, you can still solve it in closed form. Otherwise, you have to go numerical. Okay. So let's go for a steady state equilibrium. So let's, again, we want to consider the case where the drift in var theta is zero. And so we have the money valuation equation. That's now this new money valuation equation. So it just, we put this drift to zero, and then, so this was mu var theta equal to minus, then just rewrite it this way. And then we have so the quantity equation. Okay, so we have two equations now. Earlier we always had only this money valuation equation only, but now we have two equations, the money valuation equation and the quantity equation. Okay, the quantity equation then determines so I have two unknowns and two equations to solve for. Okay. So that this equation just follows from the equations derived previously, which is all of this and what we have previously derived, these things here. Okay. So in combining the two equations yields a nonlinear equation of the steady state for var theta. Okay, and you can't solve it in closed form, but you can solve it in closed form when there are no transaction costs or if the cash advance constraint, and I want to focus on this one. Okay, so you can still solve it, but not in closed form. Okay, but for the limiting case where the cash advance constraint, you can solve it in closed form. So essentially, what you have two cases. There's one case. Let's suppose now let's focus on the cash advance constraint case where z is infinity. Let's suppose the cash advance constraint is not binding. Okay, so there's enough money floating around, so we don't need. We have the cash advance constraint is lax. Then it is the case that nu is smaller than the nu bar, so it's not binding. So the interest rate differential between money, which gives you the transaction roll, and a regular bond, which doesn't give you a transaction roll, is just zero. So they have the same interest rate. So we are back to our previous setting without transaction, because by holding this money, we get actually a transaction roll for free. We hold it anyway for financial frictions reasons, for self-insuring each other through retrading. We would hold the bonds and the money anyway. And then on top of it, it will also lower our transaction cost. And so that's it. So it doesn't affect the equilibrium. Okay, so then it's the same, the price level, the value of the money is determined the same as we had previously. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if the cash advance constraint is binding, so we go all the way to the limit, in this instance, then delta I is positive, then essentially the value of money is determined by the quantity equation. Okay. So what's nice about the cash advance constraint, you either in this case or in that case. In the previous case with the transaction costs, both equations are active. With the cash advance constraint, you can say, okay, either in this case or in that case. And you can see it now we can solve the whole thing. And I won't have time to go through all the terms, but essentially you have a medium of exchange roll, then the money is developed is this way. That's the var theta for the medium of exchange roll. This was our old formula if it's determined by the store of value rule. Okay. And then in this case, delta I is 0. In this case, the delta I is given by this expression. And what is the value of money per unit of k? The real value of money is A over nu bar. That's the quantity equation. And otherwise, it was this case. Okay. So that's essentially, QK and investment rate. Everything is determined then in equilibrium. You either in this regime or in that regime. So let me do a little bit of a comparative static to get the intuition for that. So let me vary the sigma tilde. So which case you're in depends, of course, what sigma tilde is, what the nu bar is, and so forth. Okay. So let me vary sigma tilde. So if I increase sigma tilde, if sigma tilde is very low, you don't want to hold the safe asset anyway, because you don't have much reinsurance purposes. But you might want to hold the money because you need it for the transaction cost roll or the cash advance constraint roll. Okay? And then it's all determined by that. But if sigma tilde goes up and becomes more and more idiosyncratic risk, at some point you hold a lot of this safe asset anyway for self-insurance reasons or this the retrading reasons. And then you hold it for that reason, and then it's actually the thing is not relevant anymore. So that's what we vary here. Sigma tilde is very low, so then it's all determined then by cash advance constraint, and then I increase sigma tilde, and then you can see that's here in this range, it's actually given by the cash advance constraint. In this range, it will be given by the financial frictions. Okay. So the QK, and then you can see that is here the cash advance constraint sigma tilde. The cash advance constraint is not affected by sigma tilde. So then the value of money is flat, and then as the idiosyncratic risk goes up, the value of money is going up. Okay, and the price of the machine is going down. Okay. Also, you can see the delta I. The delta I is this blue one here. So there's a delta I because you only want to hold this money for the cash in advance reasons. But if the sigma tilde comes in at some point, you want to hold it anyway, and then the delta I goes to 0. Okay? And similar, this is the service flow. Remember the service flow. As sigma tilde goes up, this goes up, and then stays flat. Okay. So I can do also the comparative static with respect to nu bar. Remember how tight is this cash advance constraint? If nu bar is higher, then it's less tight. And then again, if you can see here this delta I, if this nu bar is moving out at some point, it's not binding anymore, and then I have essentially this delta I going to 0. And similarly have the QMB going down here. So I can do a lot of this comparative statics here. I can also do a comparative static not with respect to sigma tilde or nu bar. I can also say, let's do these primary surpluses, vary the primary surpluses more, which means the opposite of diluting the money holding. Okay? I can also vary that. And of course, if I dilute the money less, then beyond a certain point, if I dilute the money less, then in this financial friction regime, then if I dilute it less, the value of money is going up. Okay? That's because it's this minus dilution, or the primary surpluses go up, then the primary surpluses. But I have a region here where the primary surpluses are negative, and the value of money is already here. No? It's not driven by the cash advance constraint, it's driven already by the financial frictions. Okay? And here you can see the growth rate of the economy, the risk-free rate, and that's the return on the money thing. Okay? So the risk-free rate does not contain this delta I, or you can call this delta I a convenience yield. No? Okay, so let me go back to that. So consider again the integral form of the money valuation equation, and you can see the value of all the fraction of wealth, which is money wealth, it's a discounted, that this is the primary surpluses. Remember, this was minus the dilution is the primary surpluses. Then I get the service flow from the financial frictions, and then I get the benefit from, but of course that's an endogenous value, animal as well. I get the benefit from having this delta I. When the cash advance constraint is binding, I would like to hold this, I value this money because it gives me this benefit, this delta I benefit. If the cash advance constraint is not binding, this is 0. Okay? So this emphasizes 3 sources for the value of money. First is the cash flow backing, that's this term. Then there's the risk sharing benefit from the safe asset role of money. And then there's the transaction benefit of money. Okay? So again, fiscal backing might actually be negative. So this thing here, I might have dilution. So this primary surpluses might be negative. So this mu check be positive. So I dilute things. But as long as the other two hold it up, it's fine. The government can extract seigniorage revenue from issuing more money because there's people who want to hold it for this safe asset reasons and for the transaction role of money reasons. And that can also lead to bubbles then. Okay, so, and if you can also can you see the FTPL equation in a sense, and we'll come to that. You can see this also here, that the primary surplus, the standard FTPL equation only has this thing here. But you can extend the FTPL equation to reflect that. Okay. Are there questions? Yes. 3 questions. 3 people raised their hands. Yes.
Could you remind us if in the case when the cash advance constraint is binding, the expression for the bypass theta has new fact or new check, or it doesn't have?
So I have to go back. I don't know if I had. You mean in this?
Yeah. So
What do you want? Which variable was theta?
it doesn't have new check, right? So the expression doesn't have new check. Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's because like the services don't matter when you're valuing as a medium of exchange.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Because
correct.
we're in CIA.
We are in cash advance. So in the more general setting with transaction cost, it would still be there.
Yeah, so I have a clarification. So I'm trying to compare this model with the existing model that we saw previously.
Mhm.
So in this model, we're kind of
This is a generalized model.
yeah, sure. But through the valuation equation, we're kind of nailing down the dynamics of our theta, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But like in the previous model, we generally characterized the states with the drift and the volatility.
Yes.
But here we are not doing exactly that. We are rather taking it as an integral form of looking forward. What's the
No. So, you mean why I integrated it forward already? What does this integral?
no?
I can also write it in the differential form.
So it's the same thing.
Same thing, yes. So the only difference is this guy showing up here. And this
You
guy
can
is.
just take derivative and write it as a.
That's correct.
Okay.
Take derivatives.
But
like it's here.
okay, so government forward-looking budget constraint having a special role doesn't have any bearings on why we are writing like this.
Of course, the government budget constraint is in here. If I want to interpret this as with S, with the primary surplus per period.
Okay, let me restate it. Sorry for saying it. How I generally see these models is like we have a static block. We
Yes.
characterize all the prices and the volatilities in terms of where we are on the states,
Mhm.
and then we have like dynamics of the states separately.
Yes.
Right. Now here we have like this looks a bit different.
So here at steady state, there is no state variable moving around. No? There's no eta or anything. Because I only have one sector, everything aggregates across you guys nicely. I look at the steady state. Yeah. Of course, I still say hypothetically, this theta t might be moving around, but yeah. Does this answer your question or no? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what would be the relative scales of these three channels? Like, it seems that we have enough moments to sort of disentangle for these three channels. As you mentioned, the new check is likely to be positive for the US right now. And I'm just wondering for the latitude channels, like, what is the relative scales of them?
Yeah, so this is, I would say, is positive, this with the minus and a negative. This depends on the financial development of the country. If there's a great financial sector which diversifies all idiosyncratic risk away, so this depends also how well the financial sector is capitalized. If you go into financial crisis, this sigma tilde might suddenly shoot up because the financial sector cannot suck out idiosyncratic risk anymore. So typically this is also time varying, which in this model is switched off. Okay. And so this you cannot actually say independently of this one, because if sigma tilde goes up, this delta I goes down. Okay, that's what I tried to show here. So if this, so here the sigma tilde goes up, and the delta I is actually going down. Okay, so this is actually not independent of the sigma tilde. Because you might want to hold a lot of safe assets for safe asset reasons, and especially when you're in a crisis, there's a lot of idiosyncratic risk. And then they say, I hold a safe asset anyway, that it has this monetary benefit as well. Well, it's fine. I hold it anyway, so I don't have to be,
Yeah, do you have any rough estimates of this?
This would be too rough. I haven't done any exercise on this. I don't want to give you numbers without looking clearly at the data. I would. So also the other thing is what I should say, what we will do in a minute, I will split money and bonds in separate. So here money and bonds is still the same thing. So all government liabilities gives you this transaction role and gives you the financial friction, the safe asset role. I want to split it apart, that all money gives you both and the bonds give you only the safe asset role, which is more realistic because I cannot go with a bond to some shopping mall and buy things.
Can you maybe repeat where the second term captures development of financial sector? Should this lead to a higher
This one?
beta which would...
No, what I had in mind is that how much idiosyncratic risk let's suppose if there's a great financial sector which allows you to share risk through the financial sector, but then the sigma tilde, the remaining part, would be much smaller. So this is just what you have to do. You have to do the self-insurance through this retrading with the safe asset. That might be, much less if you have a great work. The financial sector works very well. Would reduce it. So that's actually what happens in Gautam's and also in Andres' paper. If the financial sector is well capitalized, it can suck out idiosyncratic risk, diversify it away, and that's what there's a good risk manager. So the financial sector is a good risk manager, can suck out idiosyncratic risk and diversify it away. And when the financial sector suddenly makes losses and the eta is low, and so there's not so well capitalized, but then it will push it, it cannot suck it out anymore. So it goes back to you guys. And then suddenly the sigma tilde is higher. And then the value of money is going up.
So also the government, health insurance, government, unemployment insurance, something like that.
All of this too, yes. So if you have a fantastic insurance scheme where you don't have so much idiosyncratic risk floating around in the economy, then the value of money is lower. It's because sigma tilde is lower, the value of money is lower.
So when zeta goes to infinity, we have two types of equivalent, right? One is medium exchange and a store of value. Suppose, is it possible for us to have...
That is always, it's just cleanly divided. Yes, when the set is infinity.
Given we have some special value parameter, we have some life edge equivalent, in which case third I 0 will be bar.
If the z is not infinity, is it possible, can you repeat it again? That we have
some left edge equivalent, in which case third I 0 and nu equals nu bar.
Yes, I don't know for sure, because then you have to solve these two nonlinear equations. I wouldn't rule it out, let's put it this way, because you probably will. But so the cash and advance constraint is like this, and then you probably will be nu will be above nu bar. No? So if it's not, because I have to think about it, I wouldn't rule it out. Can you speak a little bit louder?
So like a little bit touching the agenda that Jonathan has found.
Yes.
The government may actually attempt to disrupt the financial sector.
Yes.
In bad times to generate spike in prices.
It depends what the objective function of the government is. If it's the well-being of people, then not.
So the second thing is, so you in fact kept the cash flows of the government constant.
The primary surpluses.
Primary surpluses. This rise in discount rates generated quite a bit of inflation. Right? Like if there's a
what do you mean by rise of discount rate? Raw or?
I mean, if you have pushed idiosyncratic risk back into households,
yes,
then the risk-free rate should
go down. Yes.
And in this system, it should mean that the price level decreases, right? Because
that's correct. Or the risk-free rate will go down. Typically lifts up the value of safe assets.
Yeah, and like money is one of the safe assets, right?
Yes.
So price of goods expressed in terms of this numeric.
Yes. So I should say this is all under the assumption prices are flexible. No? Goods prices are flexible. Andre will introduce stickiness. Then we will see what happens.
I don't hedge to change the quantity of money. I don't have to change the primary surplus of the government. Just like fluctuations in SDF to change price.
Fine. Yes. Right now, we have not said, or could be that, how should I say? We have not introduced any monetary policy, so this thing here is not responding to a change in sigma tilde because there's no change. There's no subscript T either. But you could say, oh, there's a subscript T because banks can suck out idiosyncratic risk or not. Then I respond with my fiscal or monetary policy here. Okay.
One back to the statics folks. The QK, Q can be react to the sigma to the changes
this one? So why does this not react here? Because here, so in this cash advance constraint, here in this region, it's all determined by the quantity equation. Okay. And here it is determined by the safe asset equation. Okay. So the sigma tilde is only affecting the safe asset equation. That's why that QK is flat here and QMB is flat. Because I only changed sigma tilde is not entering there's, this is just A over nu bar. There's no sigma tilde coming. It's only once sigma tilde is sufficiently high, then the sigma tilde adds here. Okay, Tanya. Or empirically? This depends on country by country. I can't give you a general statement. I know the advanced countries typically have negative primary surpluses. The US had, in late 90s had primary surpluses, had in the 60s had primary surpluses. So it was roughly balanced, I would say, until the 2000s. Now they are totally in deficits. I can tell you about Japan. Japan in the 1960s, I think there were 7 or 8 years in the 80s, they had primary surpluses, but otherwise always negative. And if you ask people, will there be positive surpluses going forward? Nobody sees it. Typically, it's harder for the developing countries to issue debt. So the debt level is lower than the advanced economies. I haven't looked across countries at primary surpluses in history, but it could. I think it probably is harder for them to issue a debt this way. I don't know about India in particular, but you can see there's a lot of seniorage generation through higher inflation in developing countries, I would say. Okay, so let me just explain the Tobin effect. So I want to say, so observations for all three variants of the models. So the investment and growth depends negatively on the money portfolio demand. If there's more demand for the safe asset or for this money type asset, then actually crowds out some real investment, okay? So the consumption demand depends on the total net worth. So how much you want to consume. Remember this log utility specification, rho times net worth. The net worth is part of this the physical capital and part of it is this nominal capital, nominal wealth. But money is unproductive. So higher QMB increases wealth, but without raising output. So output stays the same, okay? So the output, since output is fixed, investment must fall to meet the increased demand thing. So if this goes down and this goes up, so that then the net worth will be the same, and they consume the same, but they actually want to consume more if this goes up, then it's actually leading to less investment. So consumption goes up, but investment is going down. And overall, QK going down means the iota, the investment rate is going down. That leads to a lower growth rate of the economy. Okay?
How does this fit into the stagnation?
Or secular stagnation.
Does this in the data, does the production of more safe assets coincide in like a compelling way with slowing?
So you could make the case that you have more secular stagnation if there's more idiosyncratic risk. Okay, but I haven't estimated that in the last 20 years or last 15 years was idiosyncratic risk higher than before. Of course, immediately after the global financial crisis, the financial sector could not suck out so much idiosyncratic risk and was pushed back. So then I can make a case: will this be is it still ongoing or not? I don't know. I haven't looked at the idiosyncratic risk dynamics in such a detail, say that I can explain the secular stagnation hypothesis. It's also it was always a conjecture by Larry Summers, secular stagnation. It's not clear it's still holding, no? So we might get out of it. At least the interest rate went back up. The real interest rate went back up, okay? But then the other effects like AI and other innovations, yeah. Okay, but essentially, this essentially formalizes the Tobin's effect that the portfolio choice between monetary and capital assets is a key determinant of the real investment. So if people shift to safe assets from physical capital, which is productive and leads to higher iota and leads to higher capital stock and higher growth rate, to the safe asset, which is not productive, Of course, it's productive in the sense that it helps to ensure the idiosyncratic risk to retraining. You can actually, have a lower growth rate in the economy. Okay? And also what it means, if you tax through higher inflation tax, the safe asset, it's also the case you hurt the growth rate, okay, of the economy. Also, you benefit the growth rate because you want to get out of this safe asset to more the physical asset, and that benefits the growth rate. So high inflation leads to higher growth rate. Okay, let me say this again. If you dilute the bond holding further, you use these bonds to reinsure each other all the time. Okay, so do you like that? Insured it, but it was not productive in the sense of producing some new capital stock and producing some apples. It was productive in the sense that only to insure each other. Now I increase essentially the inflation. If I increase the inflation, you say, my God, this self-insurance through retrading is quite expensive because holding the government bonds and the money is subject to inflation tax. So you shift more to physical capital, and so QK goes up. And the higher QK leads to higher investment rate and leads to higher growth rate then in the economy. Okay, that's the Tobin effect. Okay, now let me just separate the money and bonds. How much time do I have left? 12:30. Okay, fine. Hopefully fine. So separate money. So what I want to do is, so far I treated essentially the bonds and the money as one unit. Okay, and I want to open this up. Okay, so money was the only government liabilities, MB essentially. So if you think about net worth, we always say this capital is part of the net worth, and the nominal government liabilities is part of the net worth divided by the price level is the real one. And I want to split up the government bonds into, in government bonds and outside money. Okay. Once we have a financial sector, we have inside money too, but we don't have a financial sector yet. We still have only you guys. You're all producing households. And later I will also say, okay, I want to split up the government bond in different maturities. Okay, short-term bonds, long-term bonds, and so forth. Okay. So what I will do, so the government issues money and nominal bonds, both serve as store of value. So both are good safe assets. But money component alone does the medium of exchange role. Okay. That's now you can this delta I essentially, because money gives you this extra service, it gives you a lower interest rate. It's a worse store of value because it's a better medium of exchange. Go on. So the model analysis is the same as in the baseline model, except we now need to reinterpret some of the variables. So this QMB is now QM plus QB. Now that's always, if you multiply by K, then the total real value of all the money. That's the total real value of all the government bonds outstanding. Okay. And this var theta now looks like this. It's a fraction of all the nominal stuff divided by the total net worth. That's what we had before. No? I just split this up, these two guys, but it's the same. But if I say what is the dilution of this MB, then I take the dilution of the money. I can now print money, or I can print bonds. No? And they're slightly different. No? If I print money, I give the people more transaction roll of money and store of value. If you print bonds, I give only store of money. So if this two drift rates, printing rates are the same, then it would collapse to the same, but if they can be different too, okay? So this I call the average dilution rate of nominal liabilities. And so now what we need to allow for time-varying transaction benefits, so this new bar is money alone, so then I represent it this way, the bond to money value, okay? So but this is now, I only get this transaction cost, I reduce it. If I have more money, I can reduce my velocity, I can reduce my transaction cost. If it's bonds, I can't do that. Now, finally, I think we get Jan in 1 second. So this is the same equation we had before. This is called the government valuation equation, okay? Government liability valuation equation. That's what we had before. The only thing is I have this var theta m in front of this delta I because only the money component. So there is var theta, which is a fraction of all the wealth, which is nominal wealth. And then that part I split up again in var theta M and var theta B. Now one is government bond and one is money. Okay, so that's a fraction of the government wealth, government liabilities, which is money fraction. And then I get this, if I can integrate it out, solve forward, that's the FTPL equation. The value of the bonds and the money divided by the price level is the primary surpluses. Remember, this was the primary surplus per unit of K, so this is the primary surplus discounted at the risk-free rate because we don't have aggregate shocks. I get the benefit on the money. That's like a benefit. The delta I is some seniorage, because if I issue money instead of bonds, I can pay a lower interest rate, so I save as a government this delta I period. That's like almost like that gives me some extra value on the money. And then I have, of course, this is for all the future, the cap T can go to infinity. So, there might be a bubble term on it too. Okay?
So the 1 minus var theta squared sigma squared term is absorbed in the risk-free rate, or where is it? Where did it go?
Oh, it's missing.
Or is missing?
It should be still there.
Maybe it's on the. So it's not in the risk-free rate. It's missing.
It's missing. It's missing. Yes, good point. Yes, it should be still there. Oh no, sorry. No, actually, it is there. It's in here. It's in this bubble term. Yes. Oh, this was.
Just as a thought-provoking question, since both serve as store of value.
Let me take a sip of water.
So, but only M is meeting with exchange. Is the setup sort of then encouraging more fiscal monetary coordination if we're trying to independently hit the optimal?
So here there's one government doing potentially the optimal for both. Yes. In a sense, you could argue that later on, of course, the government might not want to do the optimal thing.
The reason I bring this up is I think you were making the point that there's sort of standard PSGE cash plus tradition, and then there's the more sort of serious, the modeling, the financial side. And in one of them, you usually have, one side is active, one side is passive. But it seems to me the more realistically you're modeling these, there are these moments when it might be optimal to have them jointly optimized rather than deform to rule them.
Yeah, so if they're all, Ramsey optimizers, I think that would be the ideal thing. Then we wouldn't even need independent central banks now, because typically we only have them because of some timing consistency problems. But let's suppose we don't have that. There would be a welfare maximizer. Then it would be ideal if this guy does everything and optimize.
Does it also speak to the maturity structure of the government liability? Because money is
Yes,
like
I'll come to that. So far I haven't. So this thing, different maturities, I haven't opened up yet. Okay, and Andre will talk about this too.
So in this setup, is there a reason why would government issue bonds if money commands some relatively new?
I mean, so you might benefit from this delta I if you issue only money, then the constraint, let's say a cash advance constraint is not binding, then the delta I is 0. So you could say I keep money scarce in order to get some delta I out of it. Yes.
Related to the previous question, you check M, I'm assuming that there is like a growth rate of money, and then you remove some like interest rate on money. Now I'm wondering what does interest rate on
guy
fiat
now. This is this complicated animal. Yeah.
like what does interest rate in fiat money looks like? Like what is it?
What the interest rate
On the fiat money, because is it like the risk-free rate?
No, so on fiat money, so traditionally there's no interest rate on it. Okay, so you hold cash, there's no interest rate on it, but you can think of reserves also some form of money. So bank reserves, and then the Fed is paying now interest on reserves. So that's what in the real world is. If the central bank were to issue central bank digital currency, CBDC, then it would pay potentially interest rate. So even though some regulation says they should not pay on it, but you could also pay interest rate on that. So once we move to a digital forms of central bank money people can hold, this would be the interest rate on it. And I could say on the T-bills, we pay 4%, but on CBDC, we only pay 2%. Things like that.
So both are subject to inflation, right? Like bonds as well as money.
Second,
Both are subject to inflation, right?
yes, they have the same inflation, yes.
So like the bond return then has to dominate.
The bond has to dominate. Yes, the bond has to pay a high interest rate. So essentially, you get from the bond, you get the interest, and the service flow is a safe asset. From the money, you get perhaps a lower interest because of delta I, get the service flow of safe asset, and the service flow of relaxing the cash advance constraint. You get two service flows from the money. From the bond, you get only one service flow.
Government has any benefit of choosing either?
Yes, so that's when you do QE, for example, I will come to that. You take out T-bills and replace it with reserves, so you can manipulate that.
Do we need to assume the last term of FTPR, the limit to be 0 as T goes to infinity?
No, I think you love the transversality condition. So no, you don't. That's typically not the case in our set because we have bubbles. No, we have R can be smaller than G. Then this is not 0. So that's the transversality condition holds at the individual level. So for agent by agent, so the optimization, but not at the aggregate government level. The government can issue some bubbly asset. And that's what the transversality condition at the government level does not hold. So in a sense, it's an equilibrium selection. So there can be one agent in the economy who can issue some bubbly asset. I could say it's you, but then you have a very privileged position. I give this privilege to the government. Yes.
Since we have the bubble term, can we, in theory, this like the bubble term is indeterminate, and so we can.
No, it's not that there's a fixed size. It's determined in equilibrium.
By.
So essentially, let's suppose this QMB. Let's suppose the dilution is 0, so surpluses are 0. Just for a particular example, then this gives you the size of the bubble. QMB times K is the size of the bubble.
Nice.
Because it doesn't give you any cash flow, this is a safe asset, and it just gives you the service flow, which is this bubbly size. Okay. It depends how you define bubble. Now, to say, oh, is the service flow part of the fundamental, then it's not a bubble. But if you say only this kind of cash flow is my fundamental, then that's the bubble.
But that should be, in theory, falsifiable, right?
Falsifiable, yes. So that's, if you look at the work by Hanno Lustig and all this, they'll look at the primary cash flows, primary surpluses of the government and discount it, and they can say, oh, we cannot justify the value of the US Treasury is outstanding.
Okay.
That's the econometrica paper showing that. And that's essentially where you can estimate. You make a certain assumptions, of course, on future primary surpluses. There's a stationary process. And then you say, okay, what is the value of the treasuries according to the theory, the fundamentals, just looking primary surpluses only, and then look at what the current value as it is, and say there's a huge gap. And they try to some convenience yield or something that can't make up the whole. We would argue that's this bubble. Okay. Okay, so we can further distinguish, we can open up the long-term bonds, so we can, long-term government bond, we can make it short-term and long-term, so we can have different maturities. So we can further distinguish money and bonds by lengthening bond duration. So in the previous extension, bonds have an infinitesimal duration. You can also think of a bond, but the interest rate is floating, you can move around. So the nominal bond price is 1. With long duration bonds, the bond price can actually differ from 1, because as you change the interest rate, the value of the long-term bond price is moving around. And that's Andre will actually go into that. So it turns out not to matter a lot. In this model we are studying, it doesn't matter whether they are long-term bonds or short-term bonds, because a form of Modigliani-Miller applies. Okay, so the maturity composition of the government bonds is irrelevant for the real allocation, the equilibrium part of var theta t. but it does matter for the nominal quantities, but for the price level and it matters, but for anything real, the real allocation, it doesn't matter, okay? And Andre will tell you just in half an hour or after lunch that it matters because in this model there is a banking sector, and though there is some eta, there's a redistributive effect, okay? But if you have no redistributive effects, we all scale up versions of each other, and we all hold similar portfolios, then it does not matter, okay? There's a Modigliani-Miller intuition. The underlying assets backing bonds, taxes, and safe asset services are independent of maturity structure. So the underlying backing is the same. Hence, it should not affect the total value of the bonds, how you splice it up. It's like a Modigliani-Miller setting. But if the different people so the banks hold different portfolios from households, then it matters because suddenly there's a revaluation effect and it hits then different people differently. Okay, let me do a little bit of monetary policy and then I'll let you go for lunch. So I want to distinguish between pure monetary policy and policy which has fiscal implications, talk a little bit about Chris Sims stepping on the rake and some quantitative easing, and perhaps talk a little bit about monetary fiscal interactions and Sergeant Wallace in this setting. Okay, I just tell you the big picture thing. So pure monetary policy is monetary interest rate policy, for example, which has no fiscal implications, okay? So typically so why does Trump say the Fed should lower the interest rates? Because he doesn't want to pay so much interest on the government debt. So he says, oh, please lower it because I don't want to pay all the interest. I want to spend it on something else. But this pure monetary policy is some monetary policy which has no fiscal implications. So the money dilution or the primary surpluses stay the same. So we can think of a pure monetary policy which has no fiscal implications. In a lot of New Keynesian models in the cashless limit, you have no implications because there's no government debt. It's zero. So you can change the interest rate as you want. It has no fiscal. But if there's a huge amount of government debt outstanding, it has implications typically. So that's a non-pure interest rate policy with fiscal reaction. So you can have two things. You can have an interest rate policy, for example, an unexpected permanent increase of the interest rate on bonds and on money. So you move them in parallel. So without a change in delta I. So at time t0, we move both interest rates in parallel. Okay. So what will happen at t0? So the value of money, or equally spelled out, the price level will be unchanged, and the dilution rate will stay the same, but the printing rate is higher. So I have an interest rate of 3%. I move it to 5%. Everything real stays the same, but from then onwards, in order to keep mu check constant, because now I pay an interest rate of 5%, I have to dilute 2 percentage points more dilution, okay? But I pay it back, so it doesn't change anything in real, so mu check is not changing, but I have to print bonds at a faster pace just in order to pay the extra interest burden, okay? But just inflation goes up by 2 percentage points, everything moves up by 2 percentage points, okay? Nothing real changes, but inflation goes up by 2 percentage points and the dilution rate is not saying, but we also pay 2% more interest on the bondholders. The real interest rate, the real return on bonds is not changing, okay? So increasing interest rate is like neo-Fisherian, it leads to higher inflation, okay? That's typically most models have this feature, the neo-Fisherian feature. To get around it, we have to go to Chris Sims as stepping on the rake, okay? But that's a fundamental force always. Once you have positive bond supply from the government, that's the fundamental force. Now, another thing is, which is like more monetarism, unexpected permanent increase in the interest rate and no change in the average interest rate, so which is defined, we have defined this way. So you pay an interest rate on your money, you pay an interest rate on the government bonds. On average, you pay that, okay? So in this case, the value of money jumps to a new permanent higher level, and then then you keep this constant, and then you have essentially inflation rises due to a Tobin effect. So what happens is that the growth rate of the economy goes down, so the value of that was the Tobin effect I explained earlier. The value of money goes up, this crowds out investment, so growth rate of the economy goes down. So that means then the inflation actually goes up because now the growth rate of the economy is lower. Okay. So these are two different forms of doing pure monetary policy, but most monetary policy essentially has fiscal implications. Okay. These are theoretical constructs to make sure we can design things which has no fiscal implications. Okay. Most monetary policy has implications, and so fiscal policy has then adjust taxes, and then we go, how will the fiscal side react and all this? We'll go to this in a minute. But the neo-Fisherian channel is always very powerful. So more in terms of implementation, you can change interest on reserves. So typically when you think what does the interest rate policy does, we change the interest rate on reserves, which I call here M, the money, and then you implement the neo-Fisherian policy, or you can also keep the interest rate, but adjust how much is money outstanding relative to the total outstanding amount. Okay. And this is like a mixture of what I've done here. This is conceptually a cleaner setting. So let me just explain to you the stepping on the rake. Okay, so the big challenge is for most monetary models with a positive bond outstanding, if you hike interest rates, actually it is like what Erdogan says in Turkey, higher interest rates leads to higher inflation. That's why we want to lower interest rates to lower inflation. Didn't work out this way, but
yeah, it was painful.
And so, but then the question is, so this neo-Fisherian channel is always there. What's going on? And that's why Chris Sims came up with the stepping on the rake. And for this, we have to then open up the different maturity of bonds. So we have different maturities. So you can have very general, but let's do a simple case. There's one bond with zero maturity. It's like a floating bond. It changes constantly with the policy rate. It pays the same policy rate and always has a price of 1. And then you have a bond which is infinitely lived. It never pays the principal. It's like a, perpetuity bond. Okay, that's just, and that's essentially what I said before. This is Mondiani-Miller. The maturity composition is irrelevant for the real allocation, but it's not irrelevant for inflation. Okay, and the price level. So let me just walk you through what happens here. If you have an unexpected permanent increase in the interest rate, let's say at time t equals 0, and we do a pure interest rate monetary policy. So what happens is that if you look at the price level, then the interest rate increases. The interest rate increase has no impact on the short-term bond or the floating bond, but having a high interest rate on the existing long-term bond with a fixed interest rate, it devalues the long-term bond. Okay, suddenly the long-term bonds outstanding is worth less. Okay, that means the government suddenly got rid of some of these liabilities. Okay, so that means essentially the price level goes down. There's a deflation jump. Okay, but from then onwards, I have higher inflation, and the neo-Fisherian channel kicks in. Okay, so I have, if there's no price stickiness, essentially you have. So let's suppose there's zero inflation, price level is constant, there's zero inflation, then essentially inflation goes to minus infinity for an instant, and then there's high neo-Fisherian thing. Now if I introduce stickiness, like what Andre will do in a minute, or after lunch, then it's smoothed out, so you have, because this jump down is because it will actually first go down, and then there's high inflation. So an interest rate increase will first lead to lower inflation, but ultimately in the long run, if it will lead to higher inflation. Okay, so that's essentially, so this is the price level, and that's a change in the price level, the inflation. It first leads to lower inflation, and then it ultimately leads to higher inflation. Okay.
There can also be cases where there is unpleasantness, like it never goes down at all.
It never goes.
Depending on the parameter space, I guess.
No, it should go down because if I look at my FTPL equation or this money government liability evaluation equation, it is the case that some of the bonds, the long-term bonds, are worth less. And I still back it with this. So if the bonds are worth less, then the price level has to react to that. So the price level has to go down too. This goes down, so P0 has to go down too.
So issuing long-term nominal bonds is sort of insurance mechanism, because if I have a large stock of long-term nominal bonds, then I could play this trick. But if I'm
A trick? Oh, who is the trick? Oh, the government plays a trick on you?
No, I mean, like if I have a big stock of nominal debt, I could.
You're an investor?
No, as a government.
Oh, as a government,
As
okay.
a government, then I could increase interest rates and like quickly control inflation for a while. But if I'm just rolling short-term debt all the time.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Of course, investors will have a certain anticipation as well, and it will be priced in. Yes. This refers to the surprise component. Yes. So that's why I was careful in saying, did I say unanticipated? Or where was it? An unanticipated permanent increase. So to the extent it's the surprise component.
But like in the rational expectations equilibrium, it's like people expect there's some distribution of outcomes, and if it just like extreme thing realizes then there is still this effect. Right?
Yes.
It's not purely about the migration.
No, but yes, it's just there might be expected, but then it turned out to be larger than expected. Then it's the excessive part now. Yes. So it's not an MIT shock, but it's something which goes beyond what you expected.
And the inflation, like the movement in price level gains purely from the PL equation.
That's correct.
So even if I would issue long-term real bond, then somehow I would manipulate the real rates, there would be this effect.
No, real bonds would be different. Because
so I would have to move real rate instead of nominal.
Yes, no, but real bonds would be different. So it has to be a nominal bond. Because you promise in a long-term nominal bond, you promised him 5% or let's say 4%. Suddenly you hike the short-term rate for permanently, you wipe out some of this.
Yeah, so
because inflation.
For real bond to get value, I would need to change the whole path of real interest rate.
Yes. But here, yes. Okay. So let me I don't do any quantitative easing because I leave it to Andre. Essentially just let me say one thing. One way you can do quantitative easing, you can say I take some of the long-term bonds out and replace it with cash. Okay, I could do that. And the cash is relaxing my cash advance constraint or this transaction cost thing. So it stimulates the economy. The long-term bond doesn't do that. Or even the T-bills, if a short-term T-bills, which don't relax my cash advance constraint. I take them out and replace them with cash, it relaxes my cash advance constraint. I want to say one more minute. Monetary fiscal connections. Of course, we talked already, the primary surplus was always in the equation. So, and you can see historically, Friedman said it famously, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, while Chris Sims and also Sargent say it's if in a fiat money economy, inflation is a fiscal phenomenon, even more fundamentally than it's a monetary phenomenon. And this is just showing how inflation and US budget, how it coincides. And you can see that whenever you go in a war, Civil War, First World War, Second World War, inflation subsequently, the budget surplus is negative, inflation goes up almost immediately accordingly. Let me just touch upon that. So of course, we have so far treated the government as one government. We might want to split it up between a monetary authority and a fiscal authority. And of course, they can play some game of chicken between the two. Let me just give you the main idea of the Sargent and Wallace paper. The Sargent and Wallace is a famous paper, which you probably know, where there's a medium of exchange role of money, but there's no safe asset role in the money, but the medium of exchange role of monies. And what they're showing, I just give you the results, is that it could be that the central bank is fighting inflation very hard by hiking interest rates. And this way, by hiking interest rate, of course, it makes it more expensive for the government to pay the interest rate. It only means it's only temporary relief. No, it ultimately will lead to higher inflation. So they can actually step on it, because of the minimum exchange rule, say, okay, we can control inflation, but it leads to less seigniorage for the government and makes the fiscal situation worse, such that ultimately leads to higher inflation. Okay, and that is this unpleasant arithmetic of monetary policy, where I think the central bank it seems like it's a control, but only temporarily can depress inflation. And by doing so, it makes it in the long run worse, because if you hike interest rates, the burden for the government goes up, the fiscal situation worsens, and ultimately it will show down the road with higher inflation. So I was rushing at the end, but let me leave it at that, and I wish you a very productive lunch and strengthen yourself before Andre takes over after lunch.